we're here today with Sean O'Driscoll. This is the latest episode that we've got, talking specifically about your experience or experience within leadership development, cultural building, and the whole how it connects to EOS from an implementer standpoint. So thanks for joining us, Sean.
Not at all, Jeff. Good to see you. Looking forward to this conversation. It's a great topic.
It is, and I know for you, with the background you have around that passion for leaders and helping organizations create this strong, sustainable culture, not only being EOS certified, but also having a long history of working with leadership teams to drive the impact. I'm excited to go through this with you today. And so where I'd like to begin is this whole discussion around building intentional culture. So maybe from that perspective, if we start with, well, why does culture really matter? So let's dive into that as a starting point. Why do you think that intentional culture is so crucial for businesses today, especially in the midst of all the changes we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hugely important topic. Culture in and of itself, leaving aside the intentional piece. If we define culture as the attitudes and the behaviors, the characteristics in your company, and it's how people turn up, it's how they behave, it's how they interact with each other and with their customers and with your customers. So the potential impact of culture is absolutely huge. And that really reinforces the need for us to be intentional about that. And by intentional, what I mean, it is created with purpose and it's constructed very deliberately. In fact, if you think about it, it is too important not to be intentional about it.
Yeah,
Quite
you've
frank,
probably seen plenty of situations where not only were we not intentional or people were not intentional about it, but they just kind of avoided it altogether, right? So,
Oh, well, the perfect segue. Like we see that quite a bit. If intentional culture is sort of one aspect, think about what the alternatives are. And this is a slight book plug, but there's a book here called People. It's the latest in the EOS Mastery series, and it's all about creating an intentional culture. But there's a graphic early on in the book, and I'll describe it here. You won't really be able to read it just at this remove. But if you think about a quadrant, on one axis you've got intentionality, and the other you've got healthy. And if you have low health and low intentionality, basically what you're going to have is a chaotic culture. And a chaotic culture is one that's unproductive, it's miserable, it's unpredictable, it's unhealthy, it's negative impact on the bottom line. If you go out further out on the healthy, which is the horizontal line here. So at the bottom, intentional is vertical on the left. But if you go out on the healthy, low intentionality, high health, you've basically got a happy accident. And oftentimes that's characteristic of an early stage company. You hire your friends, you hire your family, and it can be great at the start. But again, if you don't introduce the intentionality into it, likely is not what's going to happen is it won't stand the test of time. It's not going to be scalable. It's going to be a vulnerable scenario.
Some of what I was hearing is these stages, like early stage businesses later. I always think about the Forbes discussion where they talk about like vast majority, like 80%, 85% of businesses are less than 5 employees, especially in the first 5 years. And there's really a very small fraction of those businesses, 5%, that actually ever clear 13 people. And so when you think about it from those kind of demographics, there's most of the organizations that are in those really early stages that are doing exactly what you do. And so some of that question is, if they don't become intentional, can they actually break through to the other stages?
Oftentimes, no. That would be absolutely characteristic of we talk about organizations hitting the ceiling. And one of the factors that may impact them there is their culture and their structure of the organization as they evolve. Can they break through the ceiling? And oftentimes culture is going to impact that. So going back to what I said earlier on in terms of sort of that whole intentionality side of the equation, if you think about the role of leaders is to manage and channel human energy. So the intentional culture is all about making sure all of that energy is going in the same direction. That essentially we are directing the flow of the energy of the organization. So again, what you really want to get is high intentionality, going back to that, those two axes, high intentionality and high health across the board here. Let me see. You referenced Forbes there earlier on. So this is not airy-fairy stuff. This has real-world impact. That if you think about it from the perspective of, let me see, there was an article in, I think it was the Engagement Institute. There was an article in Forbes that referred to this, and they talked about the fact that disengaged employees cost 450 to 550 billion in lost productivity a year in the US.
It's insane. I've seen some of the numbers. It's insane.
Totally,
Yeah.
On top of that, you have, and again, you've kind of referenced this as well, like Gallup have talked about the fact that 1/3 of US employees are actively engaged. And an astonishing 15% are actively disengaged. Now, just think about that. Think about that at the overall economic level, and then bring that down. What happens if that's happening in your company? So again, this really brings us back to number one, our role as leaders, but number two, the importance for us as leaders to be cognizant of this, to be cognizant of the fact that our job is to make sure we've got engaged employees, people who are channeling their energy towards a common vision and a common objective.
So curiosity's sake, because obviously you're doing EOS implementation, we're an EOS company, a number of our clients are EOS companies. From your perspective, how does this all tie back into EOS? How does having a strong intentional culture align with what you're doing in the EOS world?
So, I mean, basically, if you think about what is EOS, I mean, EOS is a business operating system that is designed to help business owners and leaders get what they want from their business. And, you're familiar with the fact that it's all about strengthening the 6 key components of the business. I'll just refer to them quickly: the vision, people, data, and then issues, process, and traction. And the cultural aspect, and they're all interlinked, it's an integrated, but the cultural aspect is driven primarily and ties directly into your people component. So, you could actually argue that the people component is foundational to strengthening all of the 6 key components. So essentially what that's saying is that your cultural side of the equation goes right to the center of what you're trying to do. So again, all of what we talk about in terms of culture and intentional culture is really, excuse me, all related to the people component.
It's interesting you talk up the people thing. We talk about seats all the time. You have the accountability chart, you have scorecards, and then one of the other elements is this whole idea of standard work. Like, are we aligned on what we have to do to make a successful week? When you start thinking about, this intentionalness of this culture, right? How do I get to that intention? So I want to just go there to if we're going to create this thriving culture, if we're going to define intentionalness, what does it mean to be an intentional culture? What does it mean to you? Like, help me define it. Like, what is an intentional culture?
Okay, couple of things. So remember what I said earlier, intentional we mean is created with purpose and constructed deliberately. So that would be number one. And core to that is, what are the core values of the organization? So making the language of the core values the foundation of how you think and how you communicate. It should be observable in the organization, like through actions, through behaviors and words throughout the entire organization. Sometimes, you see the scenario. I had a pretty good example where I walked into an organization, and I was having a meeting in the conference room, and they had this framed picture or poster up on the wall, the core values. But you could almost, there was a clear hint as to how this was going to play out because it was kind of faded. So I said to them, as we were going through the discussion, I just asked those 6 people in the room. I said, so what are your core values? It was kind of a silence, and it was very funny to watch. I couldn't but smile. But 3 of the people kind of went sideways glances like this, they kind of knew they should be looking over here. And the other 3 were just totally puzzled. They didn't even realize. So it was your classic, they had done the work, core values, they'd put them up on the wall, and they thought that was it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid through the whole process of EOS and through the whole process of being intentional. So kind of coming back to your question, you've got to bring them to life. You've got to bring them front and center. And there's kind of 5 things that we talk about with probably some hooks off each one of them. But the 5 things are: you've got to hire by your core values, you've got to fire by your core values, you've got to recognize, you've got to review, you've got to reward around your core values. And this can't be a one-time event. It's got to be something that's living and breathing on a continuous basis. So you're deliberately, when you're interviewing people, you're asking questions around core values. When you've determined your core values, you're evaluating all your people, and you may actually have to move some people out of your organization because they're not a core values fit. And over time, the need to move people out or to fire people is going to be less. But when you first introduce this concept, likely enough, there's going to be a few people who will not be a core values fit. That doesn't mean they're bad people by any manner or means, but it just means they're not going to fit the culture that you've intentionally created as a leader in your organization or as a leadership team. And far better off that they're in another organization where they're going to be a fit from a cultural perspective, because otherwise they're not going to feel comfortable, and it's not going to work over time.
Yeah, we've seen this happen a lot. Either not in our own business, within our own business, and at client-facing businesses. Because you're right, someone knows when they're not in alignment with core values. Like you don't. It's whether or not anybody says it out loud or is afraid to say it out loud. People generally just know. And if you're not upholding your core values, again, people just know. And so, that's one of the. It is simple, and I always like less is more. Like we only have 3, right? So less is more.
I agree. Yeah.
And so we try to keep that simple. But as you were talking through it, and you're talking about defining these and building this intentional culture, I'm sure there's challenges that you run into. I know there's challenges you run into. So what are some of the common challenges that you've seen leaders face when trying to build that thriving culture?
Well, going back to what we were talking about, number 1 is not being intentional. That kind of goes back to the happy accident. We get people in, and we're all good people, we're nice people, we'll all work together. But there's those norms, those characteristics, those behaviors are not actually defined. So essentially, we're not clear on what the core values are. As Brené Brown had this saying, if I can get it, hope I get this correct, but I think it is clear is kind and unclear is unkind.
Yeah, I say that one all the time. To be unclear is to be unkind.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what's happening. You're being unkind to your people. You're being unkind. You're doing a disservice to your organization. So that's kind of one of the challenges that you see. Then secondly, you go to the type of organization that, they do the work. They put it up on the posters on the walls, and then they're not doing the work to reinforce them. So we've talked about the hiring and the firing, but then you've got to recognize, you've got to review, you've got to reward. So if you see the core values, you got to call them out. that you've got to have conversations with employees in terms of reviewing, that use the EOS tools, or if you're not using EOS, just make sure you are having those conversations about people, that when you're comes to review time, or in EOS, we talk about having quarterly conversations with people. And part of that conversation should be around the core values, calling, acknowledging, hey, you did a brilliant job, Jeff or Anne or Mary or whoever it is, around this core value. Love it. Where are you having challenges around the core values? How can we help you? So that would be, and then reward. And by reward, I want to emphasize here, we're not talking about material rewards. They don't tie core
No
values
pizza
to
parties?
materials. Oh, absolutely, pizza parties, but not material rewards in the context of relating it to salary or that sort of stuff.
Okay.
There's a very good example in the book of a company that have, I think it's the 5-buckle boot award, which is a really elaborate boot, that goes to an employee, I think every quarter or every year, who best exhibits the core values. So it's probably ties more to the recognition, but that's a very valuable award within that organization. And as I say, it's not tied to money. Another thing is, think about your EOS tools, like your accountability chart, your people analyzer, making sure we're analyzing all of our people and recognizing that's not a one-time event. Communicating the core values is not a one-time event. People need to hear it 7 times to hear it, for it to lodge, and then you gotta keep communicating it. Equally, for your quarterly conversations on an annual basis, you should be thinking about using the people analyzer. And that's a two-way street. That should be an open conversation with the employee. Quarterly conversations, annual reviews, as we grow, making sure we're reviewing the accountability chart. Like I'm sure you've seen it. One stage in your growth and your organization, you might have somebody who is a great fit for a position. As the organization grows, the organization's needs may outgrow that person. Doesn't mean that they can't sit in another seat in the organization, but just you got to make sure that there's a fit there. And that comes back to the culture, both in terms of the values, but also in terms of the characteristics of the seat. Another challenge that comes about is, are you developing your people as your particularly if you've got a growing organization, particularly those that are required to lead and manage people, that, what we call them is the LMA skills: leading, managing, and holding people accountable. Do people know what their most important role is, particularly as leaders? Lots of times, the start of the organization, their early role is getting stuff done or doing things. But as the organization grows, it's about getting stuff done through others. It's working through others. So are we consistently coming back to that, making sure we are putting our people in a position to be successful? Are we growing and developing them? So I could probably go on for a while on that particular one, but so those are some of the challenges that I think you will see.
It's interesting. I like to tell the stories of when my team calls me out on violating core values. It's some of the best stories. So I've literally, and this is like within the last month or two, had team members say, Jeff, you have violated our core value of building trust. And you're like, okay, tell me more. Like, what are you seeing, right? And so you kind of break it down and you realize that when you dig into those conversations, in my case, the concern is that I was vacillating between two sides of a decision. Like I'd say one thing and then I'd switch over, and the trust violation was they weren't comfortable, confident on what I was actually asking them, because they just assumed I'd say one thing one day and they couldn't trust it because I'd say something different the other day. So it was a violation of build trust. But as we got into the discussion, there were opportunities for me to learn and grow through that, because they were actually looking for like specific direction, don't change your mind. And at the same time, they didn't have all the information on what was going on in the situation. So we both grew and learned through that. And I followed up that day and put on the team's chat like, hey, a great thing happened today. One of the teams called me out for violating core value of build trust. And it was a great team building act. And so I think back to the point of you have to celebrate even when you fail at it. And I think it
Absolutely.
gives people permission to then work towards and work harder at it because none of us are perfect. We're always going to screw up. There's going to be some level of screw up on the core values, but you're to that intentionalness. I think as long as you bang in the drum moving that direction and the whole team's coming along, it's when people don't want to participate or when people don't want to continue to get better in it that the real problems stand out.
Yeah. I mean, I would say kudos to you, and that's a testament to your core values that people feel comfortable calling out the owner, and having that conversation, which ultimately I think will reinforce that level of trust. Now, if you think about the converse of that, if people couldn't do that, um, then or if they did and there was a consequence, a negative consequence to doing that, that would send a very negative message. So kudos to you that that was an open and honest conversation and there was a back and forth and you ended up coming to a conclusion and also then reinforcing it, going back to what I said earlier on, reinforcing that by putting the message out to your team.
Yeah, so this goes to the intentionalness, right? I mean, one of our team members says all the time, oh shoot can screw up 100 attaboys. And so
Yeah.
that's part of it, just being intentional and I think in some cases vulnerable when we don't achieve what we were needed to achieve. And I think that's important to call out when we don't instead of trying to hide it and mask it. And that's part of the intentionalness of where we're trying to get.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was Brené Brown talked about this, that trust is like a bunch of marbles in a jar. And you accumulate them, and just like that one spillage they'll all
Knock them all out.
knock them all out. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, and so think about it from this perspective. So we talked about some of the challenges. We talked about what intentional culture is. So there's going to be other leaders watching this, right? What are the practical steps that you would give a leader, tips for the leader, and what's some steps they could take to start building or improving the company's culture right now?
Sure. Well, I mean, the obvious one I'm going to say is,
And by the way,
like,
you can leverage any tools or EOS, you can play, whatever you got to do, like, let's give them good direction, whatever it is.
yeah. Number one, obviously, I mean, I'm very much an advocate for EOS. So by the book, and I want to emphasize the book the EOS is not an absolute prerequisite in terms of the book. There's lots of tips there that you can execute on. But we've talked a lot already about core values. So what I would say is the first thing you can do is get serious about core values. Go through an exercise around developing your core values. And again, we have a format for doing that, but there are other formats out there as well. And then, as I say, make sure it does not become the one I described earlier on, a poster on the wall that basically fades into the background over time. So you've got to be intentional about reinforcing them. So the hiring, the firing, the recognizing, the reviewing, and the rewarding. That is key. And you can just put actions beside each one of those. Just do that. Just do that. Add actions behind each one of those 5, and you will see a measurable difference in your organization. Recognize that its core values and culture is not a one-time event. It's something that you've got to continuously communicate. It's got something you've got to continuously reinforce. Another thing that I would say is get serious about developing your people. View them as an asset. View them as an investment. People talk about, people are our most important asset. You got to be careful with that statement, because oftentimes that's lip service. It's a nice thing to say. Lots of organizations say it, but the true test is actually, are you investing in your people? That may be simply time and coaching, or it may be active development via courses or otherwise. But you have to have conversations with your people, and you got to be very. We're probably over. Yeah, well, I was just going to say we're probably overusing the word intentional, but
No, it's probably
but
not.
but I can't think of a better one in the context,
Yeah.
that you've got to be intentional about developing your people. Obviously, that depends on the type of culture that you want to have. But if you want to have what I would describe as an intentional, positive culture, view your people as an investment. And that will have loads of benefits, including probably ones around hiring and retention of people.
It's interesting. A lot of this ties back to me with sustainment, right? So if you think about the lean journey, the lean space, so much of the problems in transformational development, organizational change, all that becomes the sustainment problem. And so one of the things that I commonly see is as leaders, we got too many things going on. We're freaking out about what the latest hot button topic is. We go try to fix it, but we don't set up a system that sustains it. It's that intentionalness of it's not just a flavor of the month or flash in the pan. I'm going to actually systemize this and create, like literally for us, we literally created in our standard work that every week the leaders were required to actually send a note out in the chat on Teams, at least one cultural thing they saw someone do positively. And they're like, well, it seems so forced, right? Like, it's like, should I do that? It's like, absolutely you should do it because it's not a habit right now, so we need to make it one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the point of that is that getting that intentional, like you said, and that it really creates the sustainment. So even if you have to put that back in your scorecard, your standard work, whatever it is, to make sure I check that box every week, that I don't end the week unless that's done, is part of what I think is truly showing intention or the ability to sustain the change.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, I have one or two teams that actually, as part of their scorecard, you're familiar with the whole concept of weekly scorecards in EOS, is that have we done a core value call out this week at each individual leader within their teams? Like they are checking off, yes, I've done it. So it's a yes or no. At least one.
At least one. Yeah, those
Yeah.
are the important things. So with some of the things that we've talked about, we talked briefly about, hiring, firing, retaining great people. So do you want to expand? Is there any other thoughts you have on just the retention hiring aspect of the intentional culture discussion? Is there anything that we haven't talked about, or are we good?
Well,
I mean, you talk a little bit about right people, right seats, and using the GWC approach in EOS to make sure that we have people that have the get it, want it capacity to do it and fit the core values as an intentionality part of hiring and
yeah.
retention. But are there other things from an EOS standpoint or the hiring, retention that you've seen that have been important?
Well, yeah. I don't think this has been repetitive, but put it like this: your people can be your best advertisement. That if they are having a great experience, they will talk about it. They will tell their friends, their partners will tell their friends. That they'll come home in the evening and their partners are going to notice, hey, Sean or Jeff or to Anne or Mary or whoever, they seem happy in their work. They seem fulfilled. They're better people to be around. That they're enjoying their work. They're enjoying their lives. I have one organization that I've been very, very conscious about changing the culture within the organization. They've really focused on this over the last couple of years. They're in a tight labor market. They had been losing people. Because of the changes, the people within, there's several hundred people in the organization, so the multiplier effect here applies.
Massive.
But yeah, massive. So they're talking out in the community about what life is like in the organization, and they now have people coming back. And some of their previous employees have come back and basically said, like, number one, wow, this is such a contrast to what the organization was like before. And two, the reason I came back was because Joe or Mary or somebody said to me that it is a change, it has changed, and they're right. So that's hiring. And I'd say they work in a tight labor market. So it's impacting their hiring. It's also impacting their retention. Their retention numbers are getting better as they focus on this. Another thing to think about in the context of hiring is your VTO. Um, Several companies that I work with, when they're interviewing people, they don't do it immediately, but as they go through the interview process, they'll bring out the VTO and they'll show them the VTO. And the remarks they sometimes get back are, well, wow, number one, you guys have a really clear vision of where you're going. And I can kind of see the progression. I can see what I'd be getting involved with. Secondly, one of the things that the comments they get is, wow, it's really nice to see your core values outlined there. And it's, this is kind of the first organization that I've seen where it's explicit how I am expected to turn up, what I'm expected to exhibit, how I should turn up and behave when I join your organization. So those are, I think, are some aspects where it will help you both in terms of hiring and retention.
I mean, the VTO piece, I think when you bring that back in, that does help because I actually see people use it in their sales process where they literally say, you want to hang out with us? This is who we are, right? Like intentionally, throughout. And it's not just within the culture, but it's the customers they serve. It's the stakeholders that are involved, that everybody's clear. And so that intentional culture has more than just an impact on the people that are working there. It has an impact on all the people around that organization. And like we talk about internally, the impact, if you do it right, the impact that the individual and the organization has within your organization is one thing. But when that person leaves at the end of the day and goes into their personal life, that impact is carried into their other spheres of influence. And it's amazing the impact that it has in the rest of their life. And so, even if you just think of it from a pure caring about, building communities and about other people and their families and all the rest of it, it all has an impact. And so that intentionalness of the culture to have people excited about getting up every morning, going to work and being engaged proliferates everywhere. It's like filling a cup, it just naturally spills over once, once it's full. And it's the benefits of that effect.
Totally. I could not agree more. I mean, there are some of the teams I work with now, they look at their suppliers through the lens of core values. They look at their customers through the lens of core values. Like, do we want to be working with these people? Because oftentimes when there's not a core values match, it becomes maybe a difficult or a confrontational relationship.
Very much. I mean, we've seen that, and we're trying to get better. In fact, we just hired a project manager to get better at this because of those very dynamics. So yeah, I agree. One other thing that, with all the things we've talked about, you've given some case stories or case study stories through it, but do you have anything where you can demonstrate the before and after, anybody that steps out of a before and after, you can leave the names nameless, and really what the outcome changes were? Like maybe it's, metrics, maybe it's people, maybe whatever it is. Like, do you have an example that you can talk that someone went from one end of that journey to the other and what you've seen?
Sure. Well, I guess I've referred to one already, that manufacturing company, and I mean the changed outcome for them. Like one of their biggest limiting factors was their labor market, and so change in leadership brought in a change in culture. So as part of that, they've upgraded the leadership team because they've there was some cultural fit issues, put it like that. So that organization is executing better. Feedback is people are enjoying their work. people are coming back into the organization. They actually, and I had to kind of hand it to them, but it was a really, really powerful example. They actually had to let go somebody who was very capable person, but there was a core values violation. And it was a painful decision for them, but it sent a really powerful message to that organization that, like, culture is important, core values important, and we are being really intentional about it. They are right now, I mean, they're in a challenging market, but I think they're handling that challenging market better than their competition. And where the competition are letting people go, they're riding the wave with the people that they have, and as I say, attracting good people. Another example that I would have is small service company here in the Twin Cities. They developed their core values as part of the process of going through developing the VTO. And it's an organization that had been coasting along for a number of years. The owner wanted to take it to the next level. And bottom line, this involved challenging some of the behaviors, some of the essentially core values aspects of some of the established employees. The easy thing to do would have been just let this ride. But they weren't interested in growth, taking the organization to the next level. So he had to take, and he and his leadership team had some pretty tough discussions, but they decided, yeah, they were going to move some of these people out. And they have been really agreeably surprised in terms of their ability to hire replacements for these people. And they're already seeing the benefits in terms of sort of potential future growth and current growth and potential future growth. Because, again, they're being intentional about their culture, intentional about the core values, and then backing that up with decisions around people.
You know, it's funny. I actually, right before this call, I talked to one of our presidents, and he was at a meeting recently, and there was a bunch of presidents there. And he basically said that he had everybody in the room raise their hand if they had rolled over their leadership team at least once. And he was the only one that didn't raise his hand in the whole room. And then he got done, and he's like, and they said, okay, they went around the room for those that did, and they said, you know, how was it after? Because there's this fear. The problem is if I actually force the intentional culture and I actually uphold it, then there's this big concern of, okay, now I'm actually going to have to do something about it, which means I might, to your point, let one of my star performers go because they don't align. And then what am I going to do about that? And then there's all the fears. I'm not going to have the revenue, and we're going to go underwater, and like all of the fears that come from it. But everyone around, he said, around that room, all said that in the end, it was a blessing. And, you know, I think it's not saying that out loud as, hey, you know, your goal here today is to go back and clean deck and start over. That's not it. But if you take the intentional route of this is the core values, this is what we want to do, I think we talked earlier is it naturally becomes the right decision for everyone. And it becomes more of I don't have to like fire people. It's just we come to a rational decision that this isn't the right fit. And the thing I tell people all the time, separate decision from execution. If we get to the decision, I don't actually have to do anything about the decision for a year if I don't want, which means I can actually intentionally plan how to make that conversion win for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. There's a reference in the book to I think it's Image One, and I could be wrong, but they're kind of a case study in EOS. But they talk about mindful transitions. And this again comes back to viewing people as an investment and basically being respectful of people, being kind to people. You know, in EOS we have this expression, put the love in it. So it's exactly what you're talking about, that separate the decision from the execution. You know, have a conversation with an employee in terms of, like, are you happy here? Are you being fulfilled? Are you developing? Or look, this isn't working from our perspective. So how can we position you optimally in terms of moving you out of the organization? So being mindful about that transition. Some people would argue that, yeah, let's just be done with it and move the person out. And there's a time and a place for that as well. Don't get me wrong. But equally, if you're mindful about how you do it, that employee is going to go out with a far more positive message, which is going to get into your community. And they're not going to be talking negatively about the culture or the organization. Which again, we'll come back to, as I say, particularly if you're in a difficult hiring market, and there are challenges with the hiring market at the moment, that you're not going to push people away. You're still going to be an attractive place to work.
Yeah, so that's a good way to kind of close it out. So think of it from this perspective. If there was one other thing that you would want the people listening to this to start doing today to build a better workplace culture, what would that be?
It's be intentional. It's be focus on your core values. If you want a easy prescription, get the book.
It's okay to
That
plug the book, man. You can plug the book all you want. It's cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, dare to build an intentional culture. And yeah. I mean, if you want to go down the direction of implementing or even talking to an EOS implementer, by all means do so. I'm not saying that's absolutely mandatory. It can be done otherwise. But I would definitely say be intentional about it and focus in on your core values and make your core values something that are living and breathing within your organization. If they are not living and breathing, likely is not, you don't have a strong culture and it's not intentional.
Yeah, I love it. This is a good way to end. So again, Sean, thanks for joining us on this. For all the leaders out there, just remember intentional culture is something you can start building today. And if you need any help with any of that, please reach out to us. EOS, next step, we can get you going in the right direction. Just understand that your culture is in the end your competitive advantage. And so the question you have to answer for yourself is how are you going about building yours? Sean, again, thanks. It's been great. Appreciate you.
Been fun, Jeff. Likewise.